Thank you so much to everyone for joining us this morning for our webinar. Today, we've got a great team collaborating together to provide some advice and insights on what to expect this year for trends in the technology world that could impact your business. So some stage setting items I want to cover first before we begin. Quick introduction to myself. My name is Caroline Wood, and I work at NetGain Technologies as a marketing administrator, and I am going to be moderating the webinar today. Questions are encouraged throughout this webinar. Please use the question link at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions or comments. A recorded version of this presentation is going to be sent to everybody who registered, and it will be made available on the NetGain website as well. So we will be sending an email sharing those details later today and in the coming days. But finally, if you've got any questions about the content or topics that we cover in this webinar today, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to meet with you or share any additional content or information about these topics and more if there's more specific things that you'd like to ask us and have maybe like a more one-on-one interaction. So let's get this panel party started. I'm going to begin with some general introductions to our panel team. We've got representatives from different companies and different fields of expertise in the technology world. Their professional experience is going to help to paint kind of a diverse picture of what to expect for technology in the coming year. So let's go around the room and I'll let them introduce themselves, the companies they work for and their roles, as well as a little bit about their background experience, if you will. So first, I'm going to give the floor to John Holler.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here today. My name is John Holler. I work for Arctic Wolf, which is a cybersecurity company that focuses in managed detection and response. I've been here about 1 year so far. So previously, before that, I worked at Fortinet and Cisco in a sales engineering role. So my background's in switch and infrastructure and security. And that's really kind of the topics we'll be kind of covering here today. But good to meet you guys.
Thanks, John. Our next panelist is Eric Powers.
Hey everybody, my name is Eric Powers. I've actually been on some of these webinars before, so you might have seen me. If you liked last time, great, excited to have you back. If you didn't like it last time or you didn't see me last time, I'll try to do better this time, but really excited to be here. I am a channel solution architect with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Been with HPE now for almost 6 years here, and unlike John and John, I think I have a pretty average picture here in this slide deck. So, but great to be here and excited to be a participant and a panelist.
Thanks, Eric. And last, but certainly not least, NetGain's very own John Adams, and apologies for not having a more up-to-date picture of John. That's all he was giving us.
Thank you, Caroline. My name is John Adams. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at NetGain. I have worked in various positions in IT throughout my career, both as an engineer and a leader, everywhere from working in a warehouse with a startup in California, building apps in the cloud, or running large infrastructure deployments. But my bigger passion is leading teams and developing individual talent for the overall business success. So thank you guys for coming here today. We're all very excited.
Thanks, John. So now that we've introduced the team, let's move into the actual content of the webinar. So as I stated earlier, we're here to talk about some of the trends in tech for 2022 and what opportunities and challenges will face many businesses and organizations in the coming year. So some of the headlines we've seen grace the front pages of websites, articles, and news channels lately are topics like supply chain challenges, both nationally and internationally, Microsoft pricing changes, get excited. The new commerce experience is going to be rolling out soon. The cloud and trends in organizations utilizing more cloud-based services to operate and function. IT strategy planning and budgeting. This is kind of that time of year for everyone, you know, towards the end of the year and the beginning as you kind of kickstart some of those plans that you mapped out last year. Cybersecurity, which should be no surprise to anyone. And then the trend that just doesn't really want to go away, COVID-19 and how that continues to impact businesses, as well as the Great Resignation. I mean, we could probably run this webinar and panel discussion all day and still not touch on all these topics. So since time is limited, we're going to focus this discussion on 4 main trends of supply chain challenges, the cloud and storage trends, the Great Resignation, and cybersecurity. So quick teaser from the marketing, got to give a quick shout out. We are going to be hosting a webinar in February next month about Microsoft pricing changes. So be sure to register for that webinar if that is the topic that does interest you. So to start our discussion, we are going to begin with supply chain challenges. And I'm going to hand this topic over to Eric first, as he has some valuable experience and insight with this topic and his work with HPE.
Yeah, so I think I get this question first because I'm the resident hardware guy of the group here. But, you know, supply chain, guys, really is an issue today. And it's affecting not just the IT industry. I want to make that perfectly clear right off the bat. As we all probably know, based on constraints around the world related and caused truly by COVID-19, we are seeing supply chain globally be affected, and it just trickles down the stack. For example, if an issue over in China where a factory or a city closes down because of 1 or 2 COVID cases that they find, that shuts down a factory, which then pushes back the ship date on a product that, you know, then goes to an OEM manufacturer like HPE, which then goes to our customers. And then ultimately, that's really affecting everybody around the world. I mean, you look at grocery stores in the Northeast, or you look at the situation out in the West Coast with our trucking and our ability to get product across the country quickly. It really is an issue that we are all facing. However, the good thing is with the right preparation, I think we can definitely tackle this. What you're seeing now in droves in terms of supply chain is that you're seeing a lot of technology organizations bringing their offshore operations and manufacturing back to the United States, or at least North America, to make it a lot more simple. For example, if you look at Intel is a big example of this. Right now, one of the main concerns we have in our industry is, you know, the shortage in chips. The shortage in semiconductor technology is really plaguing us across the board, whether it be in the data center, whether it be in your cell phones, which is why we're seeing cell phone prices skyrocket. Last summer, if you guys remember, the lack of cars. For example, I think it was more expensive at one point to buy a used vehicle than it was to go buy a new vehicle that was not going to be here for 6 months. And that reality is because that semiconductor technology in that example is so backed up in terms of supply chain. And so what Intel, AMD, and others are doing in that space, it's leaving a lot of on us, as well as both competition in the data center space, as well as across the industry, is bringing their manufacturing back to the United States. Right here where I live at in Columbus, Ohio, just last Friday, Intel, for example, announced that they were going to be building the world's largest semiconductor factory. It's actually 2 factories here in Columbus, a $20 billion, again, that's with a B, $20 billion initial investment, and $100 billion total over 10 years, and hiring over 10,000 total jobs across all sectors, which is incredible to see. And by the way, that average, the average amount that each of those employees are going to be making at Intel is $135,000 a year. So a huge investment to bring that manufacturing back from where it's at today, which is in Asia and Taiwan, as well as in China, and bringing it back to the US. Now, having said that, it also goes a lot back to the geopolitical environment of the world. You look at the threats that we are facing today, which are different than even prior to COVID-19. It's not just the COVID-19 supply chain issues that have really wrecked the world. It's issues, for example, between China and Taiwan. That is a huge one right now because so much of the world technology vendors have operations within one of those 2 nations, and specifically in Taiwan, that's really threatening with the look of China compared to Taiwan. Same thing with Russia and its aggressiveness towards Eastern Europe. These type of things also cause some of these challenges as well. We just have to keep those in mind. But as long as we're preparing and keeping the preparations always there, always thinking ahead, planning ahead, that's the best way we can prepare to address a lot of the supply chains.
And Eric, how are you guys able to predict the consumer demand at this point and deal with the supply chain challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you're probably seeing from HB and really all of our both our friends and our competition across the industry is that beforehand where we used to have, for example, a product that is brand new to the market and then a product of which it's replacing or maybe the generation prior, those two would usually exist for a lot longer amount of time. Right now, what we're finding is by investing more in the next generation technologies and making sure we have those in stock or more readily available to our customers, like all of you here on the line today, and less time focusing on those prior generation solutions, that's what we're really having to focus at. We're having to prioritize where our investments are at, and then we're having to really just work up and down the stack with Intel, with our fabrication sites for basically our sheet metal that go into our platforms, all the way up and down the stack. We're having to prioritize with all of those different organizations and plan a year or not, if not more ahead of time. And a lot of that really is just based on historical data from our customers. And that's why it's important when we're working with all of you guys to work with your, your team, wherever they may be at HB and others, and just make sure we're planning far enough and ahead to where we can get ahead of those type of challenges. We want to make sure that we still have that flexibility, in which a lot of cases we still do, but we just want to make sure that we're planning ahead of time.
Gotcha. And so since this has gotten such a messy world issue, do you think, we obviously have a huge demand for this. Do you think that the invisible hand of the market is going to resolve this, or do you think that the government needs to start getting involved?
Well, I think you kind of are seeing a little bit of both in some ways. I think, for example, when COVID first hit, a lot of the issues with supply chain were the fact that everything was shut down. Now, a lot of the issues with supply chain is that everything is short-staffed. So we went from having probably the largest recession since the Great Depression, a blip, I guess, on the time within a couple months there at the beginning of the pandemic, to now having one of the lowest unemployment rates in history. In fact, I think the last time I saw there was something crazy like over 10 million open positions, and there was only 3 million people actively looking for openings across the entire US economy, which is just mind-blowing. There's 7 million positions that just cannot be filled because there's not enough people in the market for it. Those type of changes in the issues are what's really driving this. So we do see kind of two different factors, the free hand of the market, as you like to call it, helping with this in some ways, just natural even flow of the economy. But probably the bigger one right now is the government in some ways, because if you look at it, for example, why is Intel bringing all of their manufacturing back to the US? Because the government is giving them massive tax incentives and massive legislation to help them build those facilities and bring those jobs back to the US. And so in some ways, yes, it is a combination really of the two.
Yep. Thinking about bringing those jobs back, the other part there, that supply chain, is really around security and protecting your IPs that you have overseas. And one of the things that we've kind of seen going into COVID here is supply chain ransomware attacks, where now bad actors can target one company and that can have a cascading effect that can hit thousands and even end users if they take something offline that's producing a chip or producing some type of service that's used in that supply chain. Because of the just-in-time inventory model that we have, hitting any one of those things causes a blip, as you said, and kind of slows down the entire process as we get back up. But it is interesting and exciting to see Intel building this fabrication plant. It's kind of been our backyard here in Ohio.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it sounds like we're getting closer to resolving it and making it a little bit more efficient, but that nasty COVID guy is still causing us a lot of problems. I know we've been waiting on some hardware for up to 10 months. So that's putting us in a position to where we might have to go a different route. And I think that'll bring us into our next topic when we're talking about cloud.
Thank you for the transition, John. Yeah. So moving right on to the next topic of the cloud. So as our workplaces are becoming more digital, so too our networks, applications, and data and storage practices. So over the past couple of years, as workforces have become more remote, there's been a surge in interest and spending on cloud services. So John Adams, I'm going to toss this back to you. Let's kick off this conversation around the cloud.
Absolutely. And so to address what I just mentioned a second ago, those long delays, now that we have the cloud, we're able to spin something up that can take us a couple hours. So instead of us waiting 6 months to receive some server that were waiting on a chip were able to do this immediately in the cloud. And we've seen great benefits from that, because no longer are we having to send all of our engineers on site to rack and stack servers, deal with things physically. We're able to have them handle what they need to from their computers. So we've seen great benefits from that. And the cloud in general, all of us make use of it all the time, from our phones, from everywhere. But we're still seeing only about 60 to 70% of companies that are still using on-premise infrastructure. So it's going to be a slow move for us to get completely into the cloud. But like any big change that we've experienced, it'll take a little while for it to make sense. So from the engineering and from the business mind, it makes a lot of sense. Efficiency, like I talked about, using our employees that don't need to go on site. It makes a lot of sense. But you got to think back to 2007 when the iPhone came out. People, it didn't make sense to some people. But now every single one of us has some type of version of an iPhone or some type of cell phone. So it's going to be a little bit of a slow move for everybody to get on board. But as that demand increases and there's more players that can provide that cloud space, the prices will go down. I think the efficiency that I'm seeing right now will be seen by others. And I think it's a great way that we're able to address the issue with the supply chain shortages.
Yeah, talking to customers that had previous projects built on hardware implementations, having to pivot because now their switch infrastructure or their infrastructure in general is like 6 to 9 months out. They've kind of accelerated this movement to cloud applications and cloud infrastructure. And really, we're seeing that across the board as more and more people move to it. I mean, the easiest one to kind of come out there is Office 365. Majority of customers have already adopted that, and that's cloud in its truest form. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's also kind of implemented this new world of how do we secure this data that's no longer on-prem, or how do we secure this data that's no longer accessed behind a firewall, and all of our employees there as well. So as we move into this, it's good to be cognizant of the fact, like, hey, this isn't inherently secure out the gate. We still have to put process and procedures in there, or maybe even tools and technologies to kind of lock this down and still make this applicable for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of like HPE and other private cloud vendors, is we really think that this is just accelerating the hybrid model. What we found out through our customers, and probably a lot of you think the same way, is that there is a really good place for public cloud, and public cloud is awesome in a lot of instances, but there's still that necessity to have that on-premise private cloud environment, but that is much easier to manage, much easier to grow, have the same pay per use or pay as you grow model that the public cloud delivers. And so that's where you're seeing HPE and a lot of our competition really adapt to this. And I think we were probably first to this trend right before COVID really hit within the last few years, and now we're seeing some others join us. But really making sure we have the right mix. We poll our customers on a regular basis, and we still find that about 60% of applications are never really going to be able to be sent to the public cloud. It'd be security reasons, refactoring issues, the costs associated with the public cloud in terms of data egress costs as well. So a lot of those type of factors are preventing some of those applications going there. And to go back to that previous issue of supply chain, this is where things, for example, like HPE's GreenLake offering, which is a true consumption-based on-premise cloud for our customers, and where you can pay for how you use technologies as well as how much of them you use. And an OpEx model instead of a CapEx model really helps alleviate some of these issues that we've been talking about. And that model is a lot more flexible and a lot easier to scale and grow and a lot easier to manage. And ultimately, so we think that working together with public, private, and this hybrid approach is truly kind of the next frontier. For the longest time, you probably saw both traditional private cloud on-premise data center focused manufacturers like HPE, Dell EMC, NetApp, Pure, et cetera, as well as the public cloud vendors, AWS, Azure, and GCP, just as the top three. Both of us were both saying the other one is awful. We were saying, hey, public cloud will never take off and you shouldn't go to public cloud. Public cloud was saying you should never think about on-premise ever again. And now what you're seeing is really both sides embrace the fact that the world is hybrid. It goes back to this simple point. we are focusing every day on building our partnerships with those three public clouds and working together with them and building integrations with them to where it makes it easier for you, the customer, to move data and applications between a combination of on-premise up to your public cloud and back and forth. And then from the public cloud standpoint, probably the best form of flattery is whenever you decide, you know what, we need to actually partner with HPE and others to have an on-premise offering for our solutions. For example, Azure Stack built on HPE and other vendors' technologies for on-prem, GCP Anthos, and then AWS was the last to market with that with their new Outpost offerings, which is a true Amazon solution. But again, that's our approach to it. The world's hybrid. It's just a matter of going in and planning correctly and talking about the application's needs, where it needs to be located at in terms of latency issues, security issues, and then ultimately, from a cost standpoint, what makes the most sense for that application and that data set.
Yeah, you brought up a great point when it comes to that OpEx versus CapEx. And I think once we mature more into the cloud and we figure out how to navigate it, we're going to see the benefits of having, utility billing. So we're actually paying for what we're using in there. So, instead of us having to dedicate a large amount in order to buy some infrastructure, we're able to take that hit on a month-to-month basis. And depending on what our usage is, can be a good thing and a bad thing, because if we spike up, we may pay more for it, right? But we may have a month where maybe we don't have as many visitors or we're not doing as much traffic. So we'll see a little bit of savings. So that utility model of billing has been pretty favorable. I think that if it's navigated properly, we'll see good savings for our clients. Another great thing that you mentioned is the partnerships between everybody, right? So now that everyone is kind of on board with the cloud, and the old minds kind of realize, hey, we need these new cloud guys, and the cloud guys are looking back saying we need to have the old infrastructure. So that hybrid model that you brought up is definitely going to be a big deal, because not everything can go to the cloud, like you said. But luckily, AWS, GCP, Azure are all motivated to move people to the cloud. So they've been working great with us, in particular, our partnership, in order to give us reasons and good pricing in order to get our clients up to the cloud. So I think this is only going to get better the more we spend our time up here in the sky. So it'll be part of the future, but we'll need to hang on to some of that old infrastructure in order to make it all work.
With that, we're going to transition on to our next topic. So as our workplace is transitioning more into the cloud, and our business and companies are, so are our employees. They're also kind of disappearing. So transitioning into our third topic, the Great Resignation, I'd like our panel to discuss how technology has played into employment challenges over the past year, and their opinions on retaining and hiring top talent in 2022. And we're actually going to take a positive spin on this subject. So we're going to shift the headline from the Great Resignation to the Great Promotion. So with that, I am going to toss it to the panel about their.
I just wanted to go ahead and make sure that was known, that it's a trademark of Eric Powers, and I will take all royalties for coming with that up with that the other day on the dry run session of this.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just start this really quick in this discussion. The fact that, for at least for me, from the standpoint of, I guess, employer standpoint, it probably is the Great Resignation. But I think for a lot of us as individuals, and if you look at it more from what everybody has really learned from the pandemic, there's been a lot of negative, of course, with the pandemic. One life lost has been way too much. But there's also been a lot of positives. And I think probably the number one positive is that everyone's reevaluated what's important to them and their lifestyles. For example, I'm just going to give a personal example. Life before the pandemic was me and my wife living in our 800 square foot apartment, and every time we could get the chance, flying around the world to go traveling. Now it is, building a house, living in a brand new built house with a 5-month-old and not going anywhere. So a totally different lifestyle in that regard. And beforehand, traveling for work every week, and now sitting in front of a camera every day and getting to, be off at 5 o'clock and see my family, which is something I didn't always get to do back beforehand. So those type of changes are in a lot of ways really good for our workforce and us as individuals. And so to me, I see this less as a great resignation, but as a great promotion across all of the industries across the US and across the world. This fact that we're having such an issue with job openings really isn't because there's a lack of people necessarily to fill those positions as much as there's so much movement within the market. And what's interesting to see, it's not just movement from point A to point B within the same organization or within the same line of business. For example, what I do, moving from an individual contributor to a manager up to a director, et cetera. A lot of it is changes in between what you were doing before the pandemic and now, completely shifting from this career to a whole nother career, because now you have the flexibility to get an online education that really wasn't available prior to the pandemic in such ease of access type of mentality. So to me, at least, this is affecting really all of us, but in a lot of ways, it's a good way to reset and really find new avenues and new creative ideas, bring in fresh people and fresh innovation, and it's really exciting to me, at least.
Yeah, Eric, that's an awesome point. I think this is really bringing more opportunities to people, especially as we just talked about the cloud, being able to spin things up and develop new infrastructure on the fly without having to rely on hardware. The same thing could be said for jobs as well. No longer do you have to be in the same state as the job, no longer have to be in the same building. You could really work from anywhere, bring your talents to that corporation that needs it. And then from our standpoint here at Arctic Wolf, where we have a lot of cybersecurity engineer talent, what we're finding out in the workspace is that there's still a large deficit of cybersecurity engineer jobs out there. So part of our solution really is to dedicate 2 engineers to those workers, and that way we can kind of bolster their cybersecurity posture as they kind of move forward in their journey. If and when they find the people to bring on to their staff to help with that, they've got that back end where they're helping them along the way. But really looking at the industry as a whole, at least technology standpoint, starting today, you really didn't see this pre-COVID. A lot of companies were like, you've got to come work in our office. We have to have human meetings. We don't really use Zoom. As soon as COVID hit, immediately flipped. It's like, well, we have to do business around this. We have to adopt to this quickly. So I started seeing a ton more Zoom meetings, work from home where it wasn't possible. Now we've got wireless access points and VPNs to connect that up from a security standpoint, but really enabling that work from anywhere mentality and bring your talents to where you feel it's best utilized.
Yeah, and I think Eric's coined phrase of the great promotion is pretty apt here, because we see a lot of the numbers of people quitting their jobs all the time, but we're not necessarily paying attention to where those people are going. And I think both of you guys had great points that these people aren't just leaving these jobs and going to the beach. They're leaving their jobs in order to find a better job. So a lot of these people are able to use the downtime that they have from our COVID situation in order to learn. So not only are we able to work from home where we want, but we're also able to learn from home. So people that may have been working in a restaurant industry or a different industry right now have access to YouTube, the internet, online learning. They can go to college pretty much, wherever they want to study something new. So even that time that you talked about that we would spend in the car 2 hours a day driving, now we can dedicate 2 hours of that time, or even half of it, into learning a new career path, and then make a change to a position that's more stable, that gives a better work-life balance. And Eric, you hit on this a second ago. I think that the pandemic really caused people to kind of reevaluate what's important in their lives, what does matter. And so that's kind of on everybody's mind, and work takes up so much of our time. So, people are starting to see the value of being home, how much they get from being with their family, and it's not worth it anymore to go and spend so much time at a job when it takes away from your family. So I think another main reason for the Great Resignation is, there was a poll from Gallup a little while ago that said the #1 reason people leave companies is because of management and leadership, right? We always hear somebody's leaving for a new company and they're going to make 20% more or whatever, but I think deep down, when it comes to retaining employees, is on the management side, right? We need to really do our best to listen to the employees now more than ever, challenge them, take their feedback and do something with it. We can't have employees feeling undervalued because there's so many other positions out in the market that are doing a great job at that. So somebody that's in a position that isn't feeling that or isn't feeling heard has an easy option to go to another place that actually will. And I think I mentioned this to you guys the other day, but you know, when businesses always say we are a family, everyone is a family here. The goal that we have is to actually have the employee want to be part of our family. We can call them our family all we want, but if they accept and want to be part of our family, then we're doing our job as a family by helping them grow. You know, it's not always going to be friendly, but we're helping them advance their careers. We're listening to them. We're incorporating their ideas into our business. So I think creating a better environment is going to be key to retaining these employees. And one other thing, Eric brought up a great point in one of our previous calls, that all of these hard, you know, world issues that we've gone through has always had great positives afterwards. So World War II was horrible, but it did do a lot of great things, right? It got women into the workforce. It created a lot of jobs. So when we hear the resignation, we think so many bad things about it. But like we've pointed out, I think there's going to be a lot of great things that come from this. We might not be able to see it right now with our current perspective. Just like in World War II, we couldn't see what's going to happen down the line. But as more time goes by and we all get used to this, I think we're going to see great positives come out of this.
Yeah, no,
John,
exactly. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, John, it's a great point. And in a personal story from mine, I had a friend that was a chef for years. COVID hit, and restaurants was one of the first things kind of shut down. Like, hey, we can't open up. There's work here. And to your point, through cloud and technology, he's like, well, maybe this isn't the career path that I've always wanted to be on. But he's never taken the pause to step back and say, hey, what do I really want to do? With that, he went back to school and now is working with the local airport as a mechanical engineer for airplanes. So he completely flipped the script and was like, I'm more into aviation, seeing how these things fly, building, maintaining these, ever more than I ever was being a chef. And the power of both being able to take those classes and courses at home at his own convenience at any college he wanted in the nation, as well as switch careers. The COVID really gave him that stance to improve his life. You know, it really was a great promotion because he's making better money and he's more fulfilled because he's doing what he's more passionate about today.
Yeah, that's a great point. And going back to what John Adams said about the examples around the world shifting, I mean, it's not, you know, like you said, it's not something new. I mean, this is unfortunately we all having to go through this together. But you know, if we look at our grandparents or great grandparents, you know, depending on our situation, who were, you know, in the thick of things in World War II, to them, they probably had the same feeling as we all did right now. There was times probably in the pandemic where we all kind of thought, is the world ending? Like, is this how we're going out right here? You know, like everything's pretty abysmal. I turn on the news, especially during 2020. I turn on the news and everything's depressing. It's something new every day, and the news, by the way, was really good at making the bad stuff come out instead of the good stuff. And so that was, you know, it gets to that point. It's probably the same way for our parents and grandparents during World War II time frame, even before that, with all these different major worldwide type of situations. But if you look at it, like John Adams said, every time we've had a shift come out of that, and something good has come out of it. In this example, the shift to where more people can really, number one, get an education. That's probably the biggest one. If you think about it, more people have time to now be at home. Me, for example, I beforehand would be traveling. I'd drive all day long, get to my destination for a meeting the next morning. This then drive all the way back the next day. And by the way, after that, I had to get back and do email and everything at the hotel. So by the time it was all said and done, it equaled out to probably 16-hour day, 2 days in a row, and a lot of wasted time and resources. And now we've seen that out of COVID. Now we've seen productivity in a lot of ways where people thought everyone working from home would be anti-productive. In a lot of ways, it's made it more productive than ever. You think about it from the standpoint of flexibility for people's life. There's a lot of people right now, you know, ourselves included, that, you know, don't necessarily have a route for their kids, for example. Like, you know, they don't feel comfortable sending their kids to a daycare with COVID, for example, or, you know, for a while, all the kids were home. Whenever schools were shut down, we had to do everything virtually. the adaptability and that flexibility that gave people as not only employees, but as parents was a big thing and a big deal as well. And that's been a really cool a theme coming out of all of this as well. The education side, though, being at home more is given the ability for all of us to consider, like, do I want to, get, further my degree? Do I want to change fields? Beforehand, just from experience personally, back when my wife looked at going full on online school back in 2015, there were less than 10 universities, public universities across the country that offered full degrees online without having to go any which way to an on-person facility at any time. Now, if your university doesn't offer degrees, fully online, is it really an accredited university at that point, or a respected one at least? That is totally a shift that occurred when people realized we can do this in a different manner. And now parents and people, individuals and employees can get that, that education even at nighttime. So that's very cool. Taking it at a micro level though, about technology, specifically in the technology industry, what you're seeing is now organizations, in terms of solutions that we provide customers, and are really now being geared towards that hybrid mentality, or that thought of, I can be anywhere in the world and do my job. For example, within HPE internally, we developed now the manageability platform on a common cloud platform to manage all of our solutions going forward. So customers are going to be able to, manage, deploy resources, whether it be, data resources on storage, compute resources, networking, all remotely via a common cloud platform that they can log in anywhere in the world and do all of that manageability and scaling of resources really on a drop of a dime. And I think you made a joke, John Adams, about not being able to go to the beach and work, but I have a lot of customers. I have one customer, for example, who, now that they can do that, they packed up their whole life, put the kids inside of the van, went to the airport, and now literally live in Hawaii, have a beach house, and they just, call up their local resource back near the data center, and if they ever need any, actual hands-on, that's what they do. Otherwise, they're living life on the beach and working remotely, and that was something that wasn't possible before COVID. And before all the changes that happened during this time frame. So lots of interesting things for sure. And hopefully I gave a bunch of people the idea of now going back to their boss and requesting to be able to move to Hawaii.
I gotta go to the beach.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, negative transfer pay here.
Yep,
I mean,
yep, exactly.
The one undertone in this is, we are humans. We will adapt. We always have we're adapted. We're still here right now. So these hard times that we're in, like, it sounds like your friend Eric has already adapted and turned it into a positive. So these hard times are what make us stronger as a people. So once we get through it, again, I think there's going to be huge benefits all along the way. But yeah, it's what we do in these hard times that's gonna give us a look.
Absolutely. And the one thing I'll finish off, at least from my perspective on this topic, is culture has been probably the number one thing now that organizations have realized how to address this great promotion. Is people, like you said, John Adams, about the shift and where people want to like their leadership and believe in their leadership. That goes all back to culture. It's not just that they want to like their leadership, they want to like where they work. They want to like the work-life balance that's expected. When the boss says, for example, I did this training on my PTO a couple of weeks ago because I didn't have time during my workday. That's an awful standard to set for your employees, like a terrible standard in terms of a work-life balance. And a lot of people are looking at that and saying, I might be salaried, for example, but I want a life outside of this place. The best phrase I think I've heard ever from a friend, and I think about this whenever I get maybe a little too into my own work, which is I work to live. I don't live to work, which I think is just kind of a mind-blowing statement. Pretty simple, but mind-blowing. And I think you see that shift right now. For example, at least with HPE and our culture, we now have one day a month, one Friday a month, where everybody just gets to take the day off, which is not something that would have been done before the pandemic. 6 months of parental leave for both moms, dads, etc. Now being able to take 6 full months paid for parental leave with their new ones. Lots of new things like that now we see across all industries. That is probably something that is probably the best thing out of this is the culture shift. Beforehand, you would never see a a list so promoted like you do on LinkedIn today of the top places to work for in the IT industry or top places to work for overall, those used to not be that big of a deal because people really didn't think about the culture side as much. Now, if you looked at LinkedIn over the last few weeks, it's all anybody's talking about is best places to work for. How do you get into those places? What their culture looks like. That's a huge shift and part of this as well. And I think we all need to keep that in mind. What can we do to change the culture that we have to make it to where our employees love to not only work here, but want to come and be, like you said, John, part of this family?
Yeah, Eric, well said. I think once you align that culture with the people, the productivity comes with it naturally. You don't have to force that or put that upon people. If you get people in the right place that are passionate about what they're doing, they're going to do their jobs fantastically. And just making sure that they're heard and respected, kind of easy things to do, really goes a long way. And I think we're seeing that really across the board, like you said, with LinkedIn. I don't think I've seen so many places promoted with things not talked about really around like salary and benefits. It's more ancillary, like, hey, they listen to me, there's a committee, or I can sit down and talk to my manager's manager, and there's no red tape or layers there at all. And to me, I'd switched jobs in the middle of COVID at the very beginning. Culture was huge for me. Coming here was one of the biggest things. Was like, all right, how do you treat your people? What makes them tick? How do you guys go at the end of the day? And really, it's been eye-opening, because that's one of the things that now, if I were to ever leave this place, culture is one of the first things I'd look for. What's this company doing? What's their passion? What's the leadership saying? Those are all things 10 years ago I probably would not even thought about.
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing I want to drop on this before we move is, I think all of us have talked about it, and the mindset that we have is, I get to do these things, so if people need to change their career paths in order to get them into a job or position or a culture that fits for them, and we can change their mindset from, oh, I have to go to work, I have to do all these things, to I get to go to work. I get to go there, I get to collaborate with people, I'm challenged, I'm going somewhere. So that's like kind of a big thing that we need to work on, to provide a culture, an environment where people are excited and they get to do these things. So
I like that, and I think that's a great way to close that that topic that we're covering. So I want to be sure that we give enough time to our next subject, which is, last but certainly not least, cybersecurity. So this is a topic that's probably been on everybody's mind, and it's going to be a major trend and topic of interest in 2022. So I'm going to toss this over to John Holler first with Arctic Wolf.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, cybersecurity, at least for me, has always been a passionate subject. But lately, especially with COVID, we've seen this kind of take over news cycles. We've had big breaches like Colonial Pipeline, which has shut down gas and increased prices for the end users. We've had kind of ransomware attacks on individual businesses where they had to go back and pay either some type of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency to unlock their goods or IPs. And really, we're seeing this across the spectrum. And this kind of goes back to that lack of cybersecurity skills that we're seeing out in the workforce. So there's around a 40% deficit where we just don't have enough people to fulfill these needs. So one of the things that we do out there is, how do we protect our assets in wherever it might be, if we move to cloud or we have work from home? And that's really just kind of pulling all together and logging that in one source, and then kind of doing your due diligence out of that to mitigate those attacks. But from the other side, from the bad actor side, we're also seeing ransomware as a service. So really, you don't have to be the hacker that knows exactly how to get in there, exploit the vulnerability. You can buy the service, have someone else do it for you, and then you can get the money sent out to you. So I think we're going to see an increased amount of these things. But the good news is the things that prevent this, they're easy steps. Two-factor authentication, good password hygiene. There's nothing really outside the norm or new technology to buy. It's really around education of people and processes. And I think we can accomplish that fairly easily to kind of mitigate what we're seeing that's going to come around the corner. The other thing is the transparency in companies. We shouldn't shame anyone that get breached. It's really a flip of the coin. If we look at the historics, it's around 51, 52% of companies have been breached in the past. We'll probably see more of that in the future. And really coming out and saying, hey, here's the things that I didn't do correctly that I'm doing correctly now, and not really putting a shame of cone around that person for saying they didn't do all the things right, because this is an ever evolving field. we're never really going to be able to say, hey, this is 100% protected. You can never hack this. If it's connected to the internet, there's always inherent risk within that. So I think coming together, being more transparent and kind of working as a cohesive unit would really kind of mitigate a lot of the attacks that we're seeing out there today.
Yeah, I like that. We don't need to shame, anyone that does make a mistake that causes some of these issues, because like you said, this is a landscape that's changing nonstop. And the more we have devices connected to the internet, we have systems connected to the internet. Now our attack landscape is the entire world, right? It's not, we just have to worry about locking our door because we're worried about this perimeter security. Now it can be all over the place. And as John Haller just mentioned, the ransomware as a service. So, now that we have all that information up into the cloud and in the internet, there's a demand for people to take it, right? And so once they take it, now they can sell it on the dark web. So any piece of identifiable information is valuable. So, and then when you talked about two-factor, right? Two-factor is a very easy one to help mitigate these risks. And although it is a bit inconvenient to pull out your cell phone every now and then and click approve, the benefits are huge from that. So also with that, I think, the culture, the company culture, and the idea that, hey, we need to protect our data. So, that mistake that can happen, you might not care about your identity, but maybe you do care about your coworkers and their kids or whoever's identity that's attached to that. So I think businesses making a cultural change and making security a priority is another great defense. If everyone knows about this and is thinking about what to look for, that I think is probably our best defense, a smart user. We can put up as many really cool technology blockers and things to deal with all these attacks, but having a smart user that's in the know on what not to click or when to say, hey, this doesn't feel right, let me reach out to IT, is a big part of solving this problem.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it a little bit different approach than what both these guys have said here. So from an HPE perspective, we're taking it more of an approach that's a little bit different. And so we give the analogy of a castle, for example. You give the castle, you have the moat, you have the exterior wall, then you have the interior wall that, it's in between the peasants, the lowest class of society, ultimately in the next class. Then you have the middle class, then you have like the king himself. And so you have these different perimeters of defense. But what if something sneaks in? Ultimately, what are you going to do from a security standpoint if something's already within the walls? And I'm going to give an example here, and I've been wanting to use this example for a while now, and so I'm going to use it. And hopefully it's not a spoiler for Game of Thrones for anybody. Hopefully they've seen Game of Thrones by now. But it's not just thinking about how do we prevent the White Walkers from getting inside of Winterfell in the castle, but it's, okay, oh crap, we forgot to think about the dead zombies that lived inside of the castle already. And by the way, when they come back to life and they infect everything and destroy everything, what are we going to do? So hopefully that wasn't a spoiler for anybody, but it was definitely a spoiler. And but with that said, it's a good analogy to think of it as, is we have to be thinking of the possibilities inside of those protections, and how do we protect after the fact? Or maybe, for example, with malware and with some of this ransomware that we're seeing today, a lot of those infections are happening months, if not years ahead of time. And people are strategically placing, and it's not even just people and organizations, it's quite literally different state-run organizations. Russia and China being the top two, by the way, in this department. They have entire teams dedicated to hacking and causing disruptions around the world. With that being said, though, they'll infect an environment, let it sit there, and you'll casually enter like it's just anybody else, any other piece of data entering the customer's environment. They'll wait a little bit to make sure they pass all of the checks and all the security measures, and then bam, when you least expect it, they'll attack. And a lot of times they'll do it strategically, where they know they can get the most out of the organization they infect. Number one, for example, retail. Number one time in the year, whenever they target, when I say they, hackers, target organizations and launch that ransomware, when would that be? Always right before the holiday season. Why? Because they need that data, they need those systems, and they know that organization will pay anything they ask for. Hospitals targeting right examples like right now during COVID, whenever they know, by the way, this is an important time for healthcare. We're going to target right now. We're going to infect right now. Government-run organizations around elections, for example. I know that's been a big topic, at least within the U.S. And so different things like that, we have to consider that. And so that's why, for example, here at HPE, all of our technologies, we're thinking from the ground up, from the silicon that boots up the server to the storage platform, et cetera, et cetera. We're thinking about security and security checksums up that route as we boot up a system, as we run a system, and making sure that we prevent any type of intrusions that could have occurred into the environment, and making sure that we always have a plan in place. And that's why it's important for you guys to be thinking of, if we don't have a business continuity plan, aka disaster recovery plan, then we're in deep doo-doo. Okay, we've got to have that plan in place, and that's got to be something that we think about, because ultimately, like these guys have said, any organization this can happen to, and none of them should be shamed. But at the same time, if we have a plan in place, it can be a quick recovery, and it could not be a, as we like to call it in a lot of ways, a resume generating event, something that everybody in the world knows about, like a Target or like a Colonial Pipeline, et cetera. We want to mitigate those risks, and the best way to do it is creating that continuity plan and saying, hey, here's how we're going to do our backups. Here's the vendor we're going to work with, and by the way, here's the testing that we're doing to make sure in case it were to happen. Just as if a fire department goes and test out their procedures at one of those cool little fire facilities where they do their training, the same thing we want to do with our backups, and making sure that we can actually recover from any point in time, and make sure that we can do it efficiently. So just things to think about beyond just the initial perimeter. What happens whenever we're inside, and how do we mitigate those risks internally?
Yeah, the other asset that we're seeing out there is cybersecurity insurance itself. So majority of companies have cybersecurity insurance. In the event of a breach, they can pay it out. Over the course of the last year, personally, I've seen cybersecurity insurance companies go back and say, hey, you need to implement these different security tools, two-factor, endpoint detection, managed detection response, log aggregation, or we're going to drop you altogether, or we'll raise the premium so it's so insanely high you won't really be able to pay it either. So those guys, the insurance companies, have gathered enough data from their clientele to say, hey, these measures stop attacks, or at least mitigate them to a degree that's sustainable for us to still cover the insurance coverage. And really, to me, those are great first steps, because from their perspective, they're seeing all the breaches across all the companies that might not publicly announce, hey, this is what happened, this is the way it happened to me. But you still always have to reach out to your cyber insurance company and say, hey, we've been breached and we need to have XY payment sent out. So going back through and talking to those insurance and say, hey, what am I not doing that the other guys are doing out there, would be a great first step as well, to kind of say, am I doing the right things right that I know of? Am I doing the right things right that you know of as a provider?
Well, and a lot of those companies, John, those insurance companies, I know there's a group of them, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a group of them that have a designation. They actually outsource to an IT security platform, and it's called Cyber Catalyst Designation. I think Arctic Wolf actually might be on this as well. I know HPE Server Technologies are, and Aruba as well, but they're actually saying, here's a cheat list of vendors you should go work with and technologies you should go work with that provide the ultimate security experience. And by the way, not only are we saying that these are the best technologies you need to be working with, but we'll also give you in a lot of cases better premiums and better better payments on your cyber insurance if you work with these. For example, right now, anybody who's part of that collective with Cyber Catalyst, with the insurance agencies that pull up to that, which are like the top 10 to 15, anytime their server environments go down, it's a requirement they have to replace it with an HPE server, because they view ours as the #1 secure platform in the world because of our silicon-based root of trust. Same thing with Aruba. I'm sure Arctic Wolf is the same way. That in a lot of ways you can save yourself a lot of money, but also a lot of time, because in a lot of ways these insurance vendors have gotten smart in the fact that, hey, let's work smarter, not harder, and let's protect our investment we're also making in the customer.
I'm going to pause the team here because I want to be sure that we take enough time for some final questions and our poll. So I'm going to transition over to the poll right now, and it's a very quick one. So I'm going to launch that. And while everyone submits their answers to that too, I'm going to review some of our incoming questions that we've got. And no surprise, we've got a couple around security, cybersecurity, and let's see, some remote workforce transitions too. So I'm going to give a little bit more time for the poll. Okay, I will toss out a quick question before I close the poll. One that we had come in is, yeah, so this right in line with security. What are some major considerations to make for cybersecurity in a remote workforce?
Yeah, I'll jump in there and answer this one. For a remote workforce, it's really, and this is really for any workforce going forward, especially in like a hybrid environment, is understanding how your users and data are interacting with each other wherever they might reside. And step one would be protecting that plane of transportation. So either through like a VPN or encrypted network traffic. But on the flip side, to Eric's point, we can't eliminate threats altogether, but we can mitigate the risks. So we also need to have log aggregation of what they're accessing and how they're accessing it. And then so we can look after the fact of what they're doing as well as protect how they're accessing that data. And that kind of gives you a two-step of cybersecurity protection there.
Thank you for that, John Haller. Let me see if I can find another one that we can answer somewhat quickly. We've only got a couple minutes left. Let's see. So this one kind of touches on culture and remote workforce. So how do you support company culture with a divided workforce? How can we use technology to better connect with employees? And I think this could probably be from a business standpoint as well as like a social, cultural standpoint as well, this question.
I guess I'll take this one. So for me, just quickly, what I would think is two things. Number one, it's never more important than having a diverse set of ideas. And so what I would say is, in a lot of ways, I've seen effective from a culture standpoint is getting buy-in from the individuals. Ask the individuals what they want to see. What kind of culture do they want to be a part of? If a leader just says, "Hey, I've got this. I know what everyone wants to see," then it creates a culture that they love, but maybe not as everybody else loves. So keep that in mind, and you want to get that from a diverse subset of individuals. And it's not just either racially or culturally, but you also want to get a diverse set of individuals within the organization, management down to frontline employees, viewpoints from different lines of business, et cetera, et cetera. And then in terms of being able to facilitate a better culture with a divided and maybe separated organization that's across the world. It's just by making sure everyone doesn't feel, I think, as a number. You want to make sure everyone feels important. One of the things I think that I've seen the most effective is during this time, my boss's boss once a quarter says, "Let's have a chat. Let's just talk about life. Let's see how life is for you." And they do that with every single person in the organization because every single person wants to feel valued and wants to feel like not their employee number. They want to be Eric Powers, not number. And so just things to think about, and ultimately using technology, using platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack, having fun, cutting back and relaxing sometimes, and maybe spending a Friday afternoon to do some type of either virtual or in-person team activity. Those are the type of things I think that you can really build the culture that you want to drive.
Yeah, thank you for that, Eric. And we are right up on our time, so I'm gonna close us out with that. So huge thank you to all of our panelists and all the insights and experience they've shared around these different trending topics that we've covered today. Hopefully this session has provided some food for thought for everyone, and you're able to come away from this webinar with some ideas about how you can maybe better strategize and position your organization for success this year with technology. So this thank you to everybody for attending. We are going to be sending out some digital Starbucks gift cards, so be on the lookout for that to hit your inbox later today. And finally, we will be sharing the details around this webinar in an email with a link to the recording and some additional information. So be sure to look into your inbox for that to hit later today and in the coming days. And with that, I will close the webinar, and I hope everyone has a great Thursday. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.